This video is for anybody who lies awake at night worrying about the contrast threshold adjustment in Zerene Stacker, the slider that pops up halfway through a DMAP. The reason you don't do DMAPs is because of that slider. Well, I'm going to demystify that for you today, explain what it's for, and show you how to use it. And that's all. It's a mini video. So it's a mini video, but it's on a topic that gives me an opportunity to introduce something that's coming up later this week. Over the last 4 weeks, I have taken approximately 2,600 individual photographs to stack in either Helicon Focus or Zerene Stacker. If you've ever wondered what the best stacking program is for you, for your style of macro photography, this upcoming video is one that you definitely need to watch. I'm also going to be doing a survey with the next video, which is going to address what stacking program you use and why. And there'll be a few other interesting questions. I urge you to, when we get to that video later this week, that you fill out that thing for me. It'll be hugely helpful. It's Monday today, but on Saturday when I was thinking about doing this video, it occurred to me that I needed to take a moment to thank everybody who went by my website and made a contribution to the flash replacement fund to pay my bill for the flashes I've already ordered that won't be here till later in the fall. But on Saturday morning, when I checked, the target amount had been reached. You guys had completely covered this expense for me in under 2 weeks. And for every one of you that went by and made a contribution, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank the people that have been supporting me all along, my Patreon supporters. Many of you have been signed up for Patreon since the start, and boy, I'm grateful for you too. It makes a difference, it really does. And as the channel is getting a little bit bigger and we've got more and more videos under the belt, equipment is wearing out and it needs to be replaced. The next thing on the list is a computer. I have to get a more functional computer, but something happened on Sunday that gets me a whole big step closer to that. The target for the flashes that I had set was met on Saturday, like I said. On Sunday, that doubled. It doubled thanks to Jan Nelson, who made an unbelievably generous contribution to the fund and doubled the total amount that was in there, which is just unbelievable and fantastic. So Jan, thank you for your generosity. Thank you to everybody who has contributed, and thank you to everybody who's contributed your support, even though financially you're not in a position to help. I understand and appreciate you nonetheless. This video was more about me saying my thank yous than it was about the information I'm going to give you, even though the information is important. I needed to tell you how valuable your help is. So with that piece of business taken care of, we just have one thing that we're going to try to cover today. But it's so important, and it's going to be so useful for you to know this for the upcoming comparison video. I thought it would be worth putting out a separate video to deal with it. I'm talking about the contrast threshold adjustment in Zerene Stacker. It's the control that pops up halfway through running a DMAP algorithm, which usually is the second algorithm that gets run. And in order to understand what that slider does and where you need to set it, it would help to understand what a depth map is and what is going on behind the scenes with Zerene. So if you ask somebody how a DMAP or a depth map stacking program works, the majority of folks will tell you that it's magic, and that it works by the little man in the machine looking at all the pictures and picking out the bits he likes the most and then sticking them all together into one picture. And if you ask somebody who really understands this stuff, they will start by showing you a few diagrams and a couple of differential equations to get you back up to speed on your calculus. So I'm going to try to explain the whole thing from start to finish. It's magic, and it involves a little man in the program who picks out the best bits. So there are two reasons for me doing this video. The first is just to simply show you the best, safest way to deal with the slider when it appears. But secondly, it's to explain what the slider is doing and what a depth map is and how it figures into the whole focus stacking thing. It's important because if you really understand a depth map, it'll help you understand the best way to stack a given photograph. You'll see what I mean when we get there. I'm going to use an analogy to describe a depth map, and it is not my analogy. I wish it was, because it's a very beautiful analogy that gets a really complicated point across very well. The analogy is from the author of Zerene Stacker. Rik Littlefield came up with this to describe what is going on with the DMAP algorithm and what needs to happen when you see that slider. Your focus stacking inputs consist of a pile of photographs, individual photographs at different focal planes, right? That's what a stack is. The software is able to recognize where contrast is high and where it is low. And in those places where the contrast is high, where the change from dark to light is rapid, it usually suggests an area of detail or an edge. Now, the computer has no trouble doing that because it can compare the numbers. It can compare the luminosity for one pixel with that of its neighbor and get a good idea of whether or not that is sharp enough to be considered in focus. So let me get to the analogy and what it tells us. Imagine, if you will, a big, thin rubber sheet. Now, if that thought triggers any former or latent bedwetters, I apologize, but it's Rik's fault and you need to call him about it. I mean, really, it's his rubber sheet. It's not mine. Imagine your stack of photographs as consisting of individual sheets of information on which some points will be sharp, they will be high contrast, suggesting details or edges. Some parts will not be sharp, they will be out of focus, there won't be a lot of high contrast. And for each sheet going down the stack, it's different. Now imagine a rubber sheet that we can lie on top of this stack of photographs. Everywhere that the algorithm has determined is contrasty enough to be sharp, the rubber sheet sticks to it firmly. Everywhere else, it doesn't. So on the first image, the rubber sheet will stick in those places where the image is sharp. And then as you drop to the next level, there will be other places where it is sharp. And the rubber sheet will only stick to the sharp places, the places where the contrast is high. The rest of the areas, just the rubber sheet hangs over them. And depending on where the next sharp piece is, they may just drift all the way down to the back of the photograph. Now, obviously, the mathematics here is incredibly complicated because you have to consider the relative contrast of every pixel in relation to every adjacent pixel for every layer of the photograph. So if the rubber sheet only sticks to the sharp points, at the end of the stack, you will have a rubber sheet that is attached to everything that is in sharp focus, and it won't be attached to anything that is not in focus. And on those stretches of the sheet where it doesn't encounter anything in focus, it just gradually blends in with the next sharp point. That's what a depth map is, and that's what it does. But if you followed what I've said so far, you're probably wondering, well, how does it know where the line is between yes, that's sharp and no, that's not sharp, or the line between the rubber sheet sticks or the rubber sheet doesn't stick? And that, of course, is what the slider is. That's what the contrast threshold slider is. You're telling Zerene that anything above this, anything that is as sharp as or as contrasty as this or more, that you can stack. Anything that is less contrasty than this, all the way down to zero contrast, that we don't worry about. That you can make smooth gradients between the points of sharpness. And that's all it is. Now, if you had to figure it out mathematically, it would be kind of challenging, but thank goodness the user interface of Zerene allows us to visually determine where we want that boundary, that line in the sand to be. So let's get back to the whole depth map algorithm and explain the last part, because that's important too. In the first part, as the stack progresses, that's when the computer, the program, is identifying the high contrast points and sticking the sheet to them. When it gets all the way through, it pauses and asks you, okay, this is where I have the sheet. Is this okay? Or do you want me to attach to less contrasty places or more contrasty places? Or are you happy with this? Remember that it is not picking a median point. It's picking the last DMAP setting you used. So leaving the slider alone is not a good option. It's almost always wrong. So you do need to set that slider with every new program, because the line in the sand is going to be totally different depending on the photograph. There are some photographs you're going to take that are going to have high contrast and important detail everywhere in the picture. For them, you need to be all the way over to the left as far as it'll go, because the program needs to pay attention to everything. In others, you'll have a tiny subject in the middle of a sea of unimportant background. The slider will be pretty much all the way to the right, but most of the time it's somewhere in the middle. And that's why knowing where to set that is so critical and so useful for making good photographs, because it will drastically improve the quality of your images if you know where to place it. So once you place that slider where it needs to be and hit OK, then what the program does is it goes back through in the opposite direction and starts unsticking the sheet to some of the spots that it was attached to. Why would it do that? Well, that is a crucial step for the program, because sometimes sharp points are picked out in a way that would be jarring in the photograph, and Zerene will judge by their proximity and their degree of contrast whether or not they should exist as separate points, or if one of them can fall away into an average. That's the brilliant bit. That's the bit that, hats off to Rik Littlefield for coming up with this. It's genius. But that's the part that we give the overall guidance based on the threshold that we set. But then Zerene interprets that advice to make the most pleasing and consistent picture. So what we're going to do now is go over to the computer, and I'm going to start out by showing you 3 images. These are all DMAP stacks. I deliberately set the contrast adjustment threshold all the way to 0 on this first photograph. And you can see that by having it all the way on 0, I have told the program to try to stack, to treat everything in the photograph as important, to treat everything in the photograph as if it's high contrast, and make a picture out of it. And what it's done is taken things that were out of focus, but I've told it I want included, and it's tried to make them part of the image. And this is the kind of ugly mess you end up with if you badly underestimate your contrast threshold. And in this second image, I've told Zerene the exact opposite. I've said nothing's important because I put the slider all the way to the right and I covered the whole picture with the black mask. So Zerene is thinking, okay, nothing in here gets treated as if it's a sharp point. So everything's background and it averages everything. And this is what it looks like if everything is averaged. Soft, mushy, ill-defined, indistinct, not a good photograph. Obviously not a good photograph. Now, by contrast to both of those, let me show you what happens when you set the contrast adjustment exactly where it needs to be. And then I'll show you how to do that to finish up. This is the final image when you get the contrast adjustment slider in the Goldilocks position, where you are allowing everything sharp to be stacked and you are masking everything that is background or unimportant not to be part of the stack or not to be part of the in focus image. And you can see that this creates a lovely image that has sharpness where you need sharpness, out of focus where you need out of focus. And that is what this all-important slider does. You can do everything else right, but if you mess up this slider, you can end up with creating new, worse artifact than you had from the photograph. So one of the questions I'm very often asked is, what can I do to limit or minimize the halos or the splooge or the other artifact that ruin my focus stacking pictures? And this is one of the ways. This is one of the key ways, is you can learn to set your contrast adjustment exactly right for every photograph. In this case, I'm in Zerene. I'm doing this stack, 250 images of a long leg fly. I've already run a PMax and it's nice, but I also am running a DMAP because I want the color and texture from that to use in my retouching. So here we are halfway through. And let me show you what happens if I take this slider and slide it all the way to the left. What I'm saying is to Zerene, stack everything, please. I mean, I think all of this is in focus and I'd like to have all of it stacked. So it's going to stack all of this and all of this around the hairs, and you're going to end up with this creamy pseudo bokeh that actually is horrible. It's called splooge, and it's where Zerene has been forced to stack something that's out of focus. If we, on the other hand, go to the other extreme and move our slider all the way, well, almost all the way to the right, we're saying don't stack anything, and that's what it'll do. It'll leave you with a subject that has no sharpness or definition in it because it hasn't stacked those images. So you're telling Zerene, this is sharp, this is not, and this is how I do it. I slide the slider to the left until all of my subject is visible. There's no black anywhere on it because that black is a mask. The stuff under the mask won't be stacked, right? So I very slowly slide it to the right, and slowly the mask will start to creep in from the edges. And my goal is to cover as much of the unimportant stuff as possible without covering anything that I think is important. Now, you're probably thinking, he's covering part of his fly there and part of the fly's leg. Well, I am, but it's part of the fly I'm not really that interested in. It's smooth. Trying to stack this is just going to result in more smooth. It's not like it's trying to stack out of focus noise. So it's okay for your smooth and relatively unimportant parts of the image to be excluded. You just have to decide where is your threshold. What will you accept and what won't you accept? To me, I don't want it trying to stack anything in the background. So I will move it all the way until it's just beyond satisfactory. Now, I don't want it to exclude these parts, and I definitely don't want it to exclude the eye. So I've gone a bit too far, then I back off just a hair, like so. Now, that is where I would set it on this. I think it's going to smooth over a few of the parts I would rather have sharp, but on balance, it's going to give me sharpness where I need it, bokeh where I don't. Just click OK. The second half of the process takes a lot less time than the setup. It's looking good so far. Certainly it has paid attention to the areas that I wanted attention paid to, the eye and the bristles. The beauty of DMAP is it preserves the lovely colors and the surface textures, and it doesn't make the brights too bright and the darks too dark like the PMax does. The PMax is fantastic for detail though. So you want both. You always want both. It's looking very nice. All right, let's have a quick zoom in as soon as it goes plonk like that. Wrong one. All right, so we have the eye is perfect. Yeah, let me show you the previous DMAP so you can see why I redid this. This was the image before this one, and you can see these gaps in the hairs. That's what I was trying to fix by changing my estimation radius. So this is the new version. There, much better. And I can fill in these gaps from the PMax when I do my retouch. This is the PMax. See, over shiny, over bright, but it keeps all the crossing details. So I've got something to retouch from. But this is definitely the image I'm going to use as my base, and I'll retouch onto this because this has the perfect balance of in focus, sharp where I want it, out of focus, nice smooth bokeh where I don't. And cleaning up all of this stuff will take just a few minutes using the retouching tools. So that's it. That's how you set the contrast threshold, and you need to set it. Don't just think, oh, the computer probably knows best and press OK. That is almost always not the right thing to do. So in the end, it's not as complicated as maybe it seems, but it's probably a lot more important. If there's anything that I think you need to come away from this with, is not necessarily an understanding of what a DMAP algorithm is or what a DMAP stacking program does, as much as having a gut feeling that this contrast threshold slider is really important, and it does make a big difference in your photographs. So the contrast adjustment threshold is more than just an arbitrary number you pick. It is a key link to how that image is put together and how much artifact it will have and how sharp the sharp areas will be and how the out of focus areas will look. All of that depends on where you end up putting that slider. So it's that important, and it's well worth playing around with. The next time you're doing a stack and you're running a DMAP, go ahead and run it 3 times. And with each one, move that slider deliberately way out of range and get a feel for what happens. Because as you start to get a feel for which side you need to err on, a little bit too much mask, a little bit too little mask, that's going to work for some photographs. But you need to know when and how and which photographs need that little bit more of a contrast threshold, which need it to be a little less. I was telling somebody just today that the difference between taking really nice macro photographs and taking the kind of macro photographs that friend of the show, Alison Pollock, takes, photographs like this, which won her 20th place in the 2021 Nikon Small World Competition, one of the most prestigious macro photography awards there is. The difference between what we do and what she does is attention to detail. So if you want to win the Nikon Small World Competition next year, you need to learn how to use the contrast threshold adjustment slider this year. Seriously, it's that important. All right, do not miss this coming video when we're going to be comparing Helicon and Zerene. It's important whether you already have a program that you use or not. You may end up hearing something that makes you want to get both. You may end up hearing something that makes you want to get neither. You may accidentally watch another channel and learn how to make flapjacks. I don't know. Some of this stuff is out of my control. Stay safe and be well. Stay dry.